The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the old manor house as Charles Morrison stood in the dimly lit study, his fingers tracing the edge of an unopened letter. The house had been in his family for generations, its walls holding secrets that seemed to whisper in the silence. Tonight, those whispers felt louder than ever. Kate Sullivan had arrived 3 hours earlier, her car crunching on the gravel driveway just as the storm began. She hadn't called ahead, hadn't warned him she was coming. She simply appeared at his door, her dark hair dampened by the rain, her green eyes holding that same determined look he remembered from their university days 20 years ago. "I need to tell you something," she had said, stepping into the foyer without invitation. "Something I should have told you long ago." Now, as Charles waited for her to return from freshening up, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she had to say would change everything. The letter in his hand bore his wife's handwriting, Camilla's elegant script that had once filled love notes and now mostly appeared on household reminders and social commitments. Camilla Morrison had been upstairs when Kate arrived, preparing for their dinner party the following evening. 30 influential guests from the financial district where Charles worked as a senior investment advisor were expected. Camilla had spent weeks planning every detail, from the floral arrangements to the wine pairings. She prided herself on being the perfect hostess, the ideal wife for a man of Charles's position. But when Kate's name was mentioned, something shifted in Camilla's expression. A shadow passed across her features, and she excused herself to their bedroom, claiming a sudden headache. Charles had wanted to follow her, to ask what was wrong, but Kate's presence demanded his attention. Kate returned to the study wearing one of Camilla's robes, a small intimacy that felt both natural and inappropriate. They had been close once, so close that boundaries seemed unnecessary. But that was before Charles met Camilla, before the engagement, before the wedding that Kate had attended with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You look tired," Charles observed, gesturing for her to sit in the leather armchair by the fireplace. He poured 2 glasses of brandy from the crystal decanter on his desk. "I've been thinking about us," Kate said, accepting the glass but not drinking. "About what might have been different if I had spoken up 21 years ago." Charles felt his chest tighten. 21 years ago, they had been inseparable. Study partners at Cambridge, debate partners in the university's political society, and something more that neither had fully acknowledged. The night before graduation, they had almost kissed under the starlit sky behind the library. Almost. But Kate had pulled away, mumbling something about not wanting to ruin their friendship. A week later, Charles met Camilla at a gallery opening in London. She was sophisticated, confident, everything Kate claimed she wasn't. Camilla pursued him with the focused intensity of someone who knew what she wanted. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Kate had congratulated them both, maintaining the perfect facade of a supportive friend. "Kate, what are you really doing here?" Charles asked, settling into the chair across from her. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the book-lined walls. She took a shaky breath. "I'm dying, Charles." The words hit him like a physical blow. The brandy glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "What do you mean?" he whispered. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, possibly less." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she finally took a sip of brandy. "I've been fighting it for 8 months already. Surgery, chemotherapy, all of it. Nothing worked." Charles felt the room spinning around him. Kate, vibrant and brilliant Kate, was dying. The woman who had challenged every professor at Cambridge, who had backpacked through Eastern Europe alone, who had built a successful law practice from nothing. She was facing the one opponent she couldn't defeat. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Because I didn't want your pity. I still don't." She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. But I realized I can't die with this secret. It's been eating at me longer than any cancer could. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Both Charles and Kate looked toward the ceiling, remembering that Camilla was in the house. Charles wondered if she was listening, if she could sense the gravity of their conversation through the walls. "I loved you," Kate continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was in love with you all through university, and I was too scared to admit it. Too scared of losing your friendship. Too scared of not being good enough for you. And then when you met Camilla—" "Kate, don't do this," Charles interrupted, but she held up her hand. "Please let me finish. When you met Camilla, I watched her pursue you and I was jealous. Jealous of her confidence, her beauty, her certainty. But more than that, I was angry at myself for being such a coward. So I stepped aside. I convinced myself that if I couldn't have you, at least I could preserve our friendship." Charles ran his hands through his graying hair. At 43, he thought he had his life figured out. Successful career, beautiful home, respected position in the community. But Kate's words were unraveling 20 years of carefully constructed certainty. "You can't tell me this now," he said. "Not like this. It's not fair." "Fair?" Kate laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Was it fair that I spent 20 years wondering what would have happened if I had been brave enough to tell you how I felt? Was it fair that I never married because no one could measure up to the memory of what we almost had? Was it fair that I'm going to die without ever knowing what it felt like to be completely honest with the person I loved most?" The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Charles stared into the flames, remembering the night before graduation. He had wanted to kiss her too, had spent weeks building up the courage to tell her how he felt. But when she pulled away, when she talked about preserving their friendship, he had buried those feelings so deep he almost convinced himself they had never existed. Meeting Camilla had been a relief in many ways. She was uncomplicated in her desires, clear about what she wanted from life. She wanted marriage, children, social status, goals Charles could understand and achieve. With Camilla, there were no unspoken feelings, no complicated histories, just a straightforward path to a conventional life. But now, looking at Kate in the firelight, Charles remembered why he had fallen for her in the first place. The way she challenged him intellectually, the way she made him laugh, the way she could discuss philosophy and politics with equal passion. Camilla was beautiful and accomplished, but she had never stirred his soul the way Kate did. "Do you love her?" Kate asked quietly. "Camilla, I mean, do you really love her?" The question hung in the air between them. Charles thought about his wife upstairs, probably lying awake in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about their comfortable routines, their shared social circle, their perfectly appointed life. "I care about her," he said finally. "I respect her. We have a good life together." "That's not what I asked." Charles closed his eyes. The honest answer was complicated. He had thought he loved Camilla when they married. She was everything a man in his position was supposed to want. But love, real love, the kind that made your heart race and your palms sweat, the kind that kept you awake at night thinking about someone, that had always belonged to Kate. "No," he whispered, "not the way I loved you." Kate nodded as if she had expected this answer. "I know you're married. I know you have obligations. I'm not here to ask you to leave her or to disrupt your life. I just needed you to know the truth before it's too late. Kate, there's something else." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been writing letters. To you. For 20 years. Letters I never sent, saying all the things I was too afraid to say in person. I thought maybe you should have them." Charles took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words. His name was written on the front in Kate's distinctive handwriting, faded from years of handling. "You don't have to read them now," Kate said. Maybe you shouldn't, but I wanted you to have them." A sound from upstairs made them both look up again. It was subtle, a door closing, perhaps, or footsteps moving across the floor. Charles wondered how long Camilla had been listening, what she might have heard. "I should go," Kate said, starting to stand. "No." Charles reached out and caught her hand. "Stay, please. We haven't talked like this in 20 years. If you really only have—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The idea of Kate dying, of losing her permanently, was too much to bear. 6 months, she finished for him. Maybe less. The doctors weren't very optimistic. "Then stay. We'll figure out the rest later." Kate looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. "What about Camilla?" "I'll talk to her. I'll explain that you're sick, that you need support." "Will you tell her the rest?" Charles considered this. His marriage to Camilla was built on stability, respectability, and mutual goals. It wasn't built on passionate love or complete honesty. They had never discussed past relationships in detail. Camilla knew he and Kate had been friends at university, but she had never seemed particularly interested in the details. "I don't know," he admitted. "I need time to think." Kate squeezed his hand gently. "I understand. This is a lot to process. I probably shouldn't have come here unannounced. I've been thinking about death a lot lately, obviously, and I realized how many things I've left unsaid, how many chances I've missed because I was too afraid to take them." "I'm glad you came," Charles said, and meant it. I wish things had been different. I wish we had been braver 20 years ago." "We were young," Kate said. "We thought we had all the time in the world to figure things out. We thought there would always be another chance, another day to be honest." Charles looked at the envelope in his lap, then back at Kate. "What happens now?" "I don't know. I've been focused on getting through each day, on settling my affairs. My law practice is being transferred to my partner. I'm selling my apartment in the city. I wanted to travel, to see places I've always talked about visiting but never made time for. But mostly I wanted to make peace with the important people in my life." "Am I the only one you've told? About being sick, I mean?" "My sister knows. A few close friends. But you're the only one who knows about the other thing. About how I felt. How I still feel." The admission hung between them like a challenge. Charles felt the weight of 20 years of missed opportunities, of choices made from fear rather than love. He thought about the life he had built with Camilla, solid and respectable but lacking the spark that Kate had always brought to his world. Another sound from upstairs, more definite this time. Footsteps moving across the floor, then stopping. Charles imagined Camilla standing at the top of the stairs, listening to voices drifting up from the study. He wondered what she was thinking, what she suspected. "I should check on Camilla," Charles said reluctantly. "She wasn't feeling well earlier." Kate nodded and stood. "Of course, I can stay in the guest room if that's all right. I drove straight through from the city and I'm exhausted." "Of course, you know where everything is." They stood facing each other in the firelight, 20 years of history and 6 months of future stretching between them. Charles wanted to hold her, to promise her things he had no right to promise. Instead, he stepped back, maintaining the careful distance that had defined their relationship for 2 decades. "Kate," he said as she reached the door, "I'm sorry. For everything. For not being brave enough to fight for us. For letting you walk away without telling you how I felt. For 20 years of wondering what might have been." She turned back to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "We were both scared, Charles. We both made choices we thought were safe. But maybe it's not too late to be brave now." After she left the room, Charles stood alone by the dying fire, holding the envelope of letters and feeling the weight of decisions that could change everything. Upstairs, he could hear water running in the guest bathroom. Camilla's bathroom remained silent. He walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the gravel driveway into streams of running water. Kate's car sat in the circular drive, a physical reminder that this conversation was real, that everything in his carefully ordered world was about to change. The letter from Camilla still lay unopened on his desk. He picked it up, noting the formal weight of the stationery, the careful penmanship. With trembling fingers, he opened it and read, "Charles, I know Kate Sullivan is coming to see you tonight. I know because I invited her. There are things we need to discuss, all of us together. The truth has been hidden long enough. Meet me in the morning room at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We need to talk. C." Charles read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Camilla had invited Kate. She knew about their history. Had known all along. But how much did she know? And why was she orchestrating this confrontation now? He looked at the ceiling again, imagining his wife lying in their bed, planning whatever conversation awaited them tomorrow. For the first time in their 20-year marriage, Charles felt truly afraid of what Camilla might say or do. The house settled around him with creaks and sighs, as if even the walls knew that everything was about to change. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside, 3 people tried to sleep while carrying secrets that had shaped their lives for far too long. In the guest room down the hall, Kate lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had done the right thing. The weight of her illness pressed down on her chest like a physical force, but for the first time in months, she also felt something else. Relief. The truth was finally out, or at least part of it. And in the master bedroom at the end of the hall, Camilla Morrison sat by the window, watching the rain and thinking about tomorrow's conversation. She had been planning this moment for 20 years, waiting for the right time to reveal what she knew. Kate's illness had simply provided the perfect opportunity to force the truth into the open. The storm would pass by morning, but the tempest brewing inside the old manor house was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and subdued over the Morrison estate, the storm having passed but leaving the world washed clean and somehow different. Charles had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between reading Kate's letters and staring out the window at the rain-soaked gardens. Each letter revealed another layer of the love story he had never known existed. 20 years of Kate's thoughts, dreams, and regrets, all addressed to him but never shared. The letters painted a picture of a woman who had watched from afar as he built his life with Camilla, who had celebrated his successes and mourned his setbacks in silence. She had written about attending his wedding, about the physical pain of watching him promise himself to another woman while she stood in the crowd, smiling and clapping like a supportive friend. One letter, dated just 6 months after his marriage, particularly haunted him. "I keep wondering if you think about our last night at Cambridge. Do you remember how close we came to changing everything? I replay that moment in my mind constantly, wondering what would have happened if I had been brave enough to let you kiss me. Would we be together now? Would you be happy in a way that you aren't with her? I see you at social gatherings, Charles, and you look content but not joyful. There's a sadness in your eyes that wasn't there before. I tell myself I'm imagining it, that I'm seeing what I want to see, but I don't think I am." Now, as Charles sat in his study at 9:30 in the morning, he realized Kate had been right. He had been content but not joyful, settled but not passionate. He had convinced himself that contentment was enough, that the steady companionship he shared with Camilla was preferable to the uncertainty of deeper emotions. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kate appeared in the doorway, dressed in clothes she must have retrieved from her car. She looked pale and fragile in the morning light, the effects of her illness more apparent than they had been the night before. "How are you feeling?" Charles asked, rising from his chair. "Tired," The medication makes everything feel fuzzy. She gestured to the scattered letters on his desk. You read them. Some of them. Kate, I had no idea. All these years. I know. I was very careful to hide it. I became quite good at pretending to be happy for you and Camilla. Almost convinced myself it was true sometimes. Charles wanted to go to her, to hold her and apologize for 20 years of blindness. But before he could move, another voice spoke from behind Kate. Good morning, you two. I trust you slept well. Camilla stood in the hallway, perfectly dressed, despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was styled in its usual elegant chignon, her makeup flawless. She wore a navy blue dress that Charles recognized as one of her favorites, the one she wore when she needed to feel powerful. Camilla, Charles began, but she held up her hand. The morning room, as I mentioned in my note. 10 o'clock sharp. We have a great deal to discuss. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking decisively on the hardwood floors. Charles and Kate exchanged glances, both recognizing that they were about to enter a conversation they had never imagined possible. The morning room was Camilla's domain, decorated in soft yellows and cream with antique furniture she had inherited from her grandmother. She had arranged 3 chairs in a triangle facing each other, with a silver tea service set on the mahogany side table. Fresh flowers from the greenhouse, white roses and baby's breath, filled a crystal vase, their fragrance competing with the lingering scent of rain from the open French doors. Camilla was already seated when Charles and Kate entered, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. She gestured for them to take the remaining chairs. I suppose you're wondering how much I know, Camilla began without preamble. The answer is everything. Charles felt his stomach drop. Camilla, please let me speak first. I've been planning this conversation for 20 years. She poured 3 cups of tea with steady hands. I know that you and Kate were in love at university. I know that you almost kissed the night before graduation. I know that Kate stepped aside when I showed interest in you. And I know that she's been in love with you throughout our entire marriage. Kate's face had gone white. How could you possibly know all of that? Several ways, actually. First, I'm not stupid. The way you two looked at each other, the careful way you avoided being alone together, the way Kate never married despite being beautiful and successful, it wasn't difficult to piece together. Camilla sipped her tea calmly, as if discussing the weather. But I also had help. Do you remember Sarah Henderson from Cambridge? She was Kate's roommate senior year. She married my cousin David, and she told me the whole story at our engagement party. How Kate had been desperately in love with you. How she had planned to tell you her feelings but lost her nerve at the last moment. Charles felt the room spinning around him. You knew this when we got engaged? I knew it when I first approached you at that gallery opening. David had mentioned his wife's brilliant roommate who had been pining after some boy from the political society. When I met you and you mentioned Kate Sullivan, I put the pieces together quite quickly. Kate leaned forward in her chair. So you pursued Charles knowing that he was in love with someone else? Yes. Though to be fair, he wasn't entirely aware of his own feelings at the time. Men can be remarkably dense about such things. Camilla's tone was conversational, almost amused. I saw an opportunity and I took it. Charles was handsome, intelligent, from a good family, and clearly destined for success. The fact that his heart belonged to someone else was simply an obstacle to overcome. Charles stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. You manipulated me. Our entire relationship, our marriage, it was all based on manipulation. Don't be so dramatic, Charles. I provided you with exactly what you wanted at the time. A clear path forward, someone who knew what she wanted from life and wasn't afraid to pursue it. You were floundering after graduation, afraid to take any real risks. I gave you direction, What about love? Kate asked quietly. Did you ever love him? Camilla considered the question seriously. I loved what he represented. Security, respectability, a certain lifestyle. I grew fond of him over the years, certainly. He's a good man, an easy man to live with. But love in the romantic sense? The way you love him? She shook her head. No, I don't think I'm capable of that kind of love. I'm far too practical. The admission hung in the air like a physical thing. Charles realized that in 20 years of marriage, Camilla had never once told him she loved him without it being in response to his own declaration first. He had attributed this to reserve, to her upper-class upbringing. He had never considered that she simply didn't feel it. Why are you telling us this now? Charles asked. Why invite Kate here? Why orchestrate this whole scene? Camilla refilled her teacup, taking her time. Because Kate is dying, and because I'm tired of living a lie. I'm 51 years old, Charles. I've spent 20 years being the perfect wife to a man who has never truly been mine. I've hosted dinner parties and charity events and smiled at people who bore me to tears, all in service of a marriage that was never real. She turned to Kate. I know you're sick. I've known for several months, actually. Dr. Patricia Wells is a dear friend of mine from university. She mentioned her brilliant lawyer friend who was fighting cancer, and the name was too much of a coincidence. I had her confirm it was you. Kate's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. You had my doctor. I had my friend tell me whether my husband's former lover was dying. Yes, and once I knew you were, I realized this might be our only chance to resolve this situation honestly. What situation? Charles demanded. What are you talking about? Camilla stood and walked to the French doors. Looking out at the garden where autumn roses still bloomed despite the previous night's storm. The situation where we're all trapped in roles we chose 20 years ago based on fear rather than love. Kate was afraid to fight for you, so she stepped aside. You were afraid of uncertainty, so you chose safety. I was afraid of being alone, so I chose security over love. She turned back to face them. But people change, Charles. I've changed. I no longer want to be married to a man who settled for me because his first choice was too afraid to claim him. And I suspect you no longer want to be married to a woman you chose because she was the safe option. Charles felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Are you saying you want a divorce? I'm saying I want us all to stop pretending. Kate is dying, and that changes everything. It puts time limits on things, creates urgency. We can't waste another 20 years on comfortable lies. Kate had been silent throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. Camilla, I didn't come here to destroy your marriage. I came to make peace with Charles before I die. I never intended to disrupt anything. No, I'm sure you didn't. You're far too noble for that. But your presence here has disrupted everything just by being honest about your feelings, and I'm grateful for that disruption. Camilla returned to her chair, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. I've been thinking about this for months, ever since I learned about your illness. I've been asking myself what I really want from the rest of my life. And I've concluded that I want something real, even if it's difficult. I want to love and be loved genuinely, not perform love because it's expected. And you think Charles and Kate should be together? Charles asked, feeling like a spectator at his own life's most important conversation. I think you should have the chance to find out what you might have been together, without the weight of guilt or the complications of an existing marriage. I think Kate deserves to spend whatever time she has left with someone who has always loved her completely. And I think I deserve to find out if I'm capable of more than just fondness and compatibility. The room fell silent, except for the sound of birds in the garden and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Charles looked back and forth between the two women who had shaped his adult life. Kate, who had loved him in secret for 20 years, and Camilla, who had married him knowing she was taking him from someone else. "You're serious," he said finally. "You really want to end our marriage." "I want to free us all from obligations that have prevented us from finding real happiness." "Yes." Kate leaned forward. "Camilla, this is incredibly generous, but I'm dying. Even if Charles and even if we tried to build something together, it would only be for a few months. You'd be giving up 20 years of marriage for the chance that Charles might finally experience real love, even if it's brief. For the chance that you might know what it feels like to be with the person you've always wanted. And for the chance that I might find someone who chooses me because they can't imagine being with anyone else. Not because I'm a sensible option." Camilla's voice grew stronger, more passionate than Charles had ever heard it. "Do you know what it's like to know that your husband dreams of another woman? To see him look at old university photos with an expression he's never worn when looking at you? To build a perfectly lovely life with someone while knowing that his heart has always belonged to someone else?" Charles felt ashamed as he realized how transparent he must have been over the years. He thought he had hidden his feelings well, but apparently Camilla had been watching and noting every tell. "I've been a good wife to you, Charles," Camilla continued. "I've supported your career, managed our social life, been faithful and devoted. But I've never been the love of your life, and we both know it. Kate has always been that, even when you didn't allow yourself to acknowledge it." Kate was crying silently now, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "This isn't how I imagined this conversation going." "How did you imagine it?" Camilla asked gently. "I thought I would tell Charles how I felt. We would have some kind of closure, and then I would leave to face my illness alone. I never imagined you would be so understanding." "I'm not being understanding," Camilla corrected. "I'm being selfish. I want more than I've had, and I can't have it while maintaining the pretense of our marriage. This situation gives me the excuse I've been looking for to make a change I've wanted to make for years." Charles finally found his voice. "What about the practical considerations? The house, our finances, our social circle?" "People will ask questions?" "People always ask questions when marriages end. We'll tell them we grew apart, that we want different things from life. It happens all the time." Camilla's tone was matter-of-fact. "As for the practical matters, I've already consulted with a lawyer. I don't want anything from you except my personal belongings and my grandmother's furniture. I have my own money, my own connections. I'll be fine." "Where will you go?" Kate asked. "I've been thinking about that for months. There's a position available at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Contemporary European paintings. It's something I've always wanted to do but couldn't because it would have meant leaving Charles's career behind. Now I can pursue my own interests for the first time in 20 years. The conversation was moving too fast for Charles to process completely. His marriage was ending, Kate was dying, and somehow these two women had orchestrated a situation that gave everyone permission to pursue what they had always wanted, but never felt they could have. "Kate," he said, turning to her, "what do you want? Not what you think is right or noble or fair to anyone else. What do you want?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue Camilla handed her. "I want to spend whatever time I have left with you. I want to know what it feels like to be loved by you openly, without secrets or guilt. I want to sleep next to you and wake up in your arms. I want to be brave enough to accept what I've wanted for 20 years. And you, Camilla? Are you absolutely certain about this?" His wife smiled, and for the first time in years it reached her eyes. "I've never been more certain about anything. I want to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect wife for someone who settled for me. I want to discover whether I can love someone the way Kate has always loved you." Charles looked around the morning room, at the life Camilla had so carefully constructed around them. The antique furniture, the perfect flower arrangements, the silver tea service, all of it representing 20 years of a life that had been comfortable, but never passionate. "There's something I need to say," he began slowly. "To both of you. Camilla, You weren't second choice because you were inadequate. You were second choice because I was a coward. I chose you because you felt safe. Because loving you didn't terrify me the way loving Kate did. That wasn't fair to you." He turned to Kate. "And you weren't too late or too afraid. I was too afraid. If I had fought for us 20 years ago, if I had been honest about my feelings, maybe we could have had a lifetime together instead of 6 months." "Maybe," Kate said softly. "But maybe we needed to become the people we are now before we could appreciate what we almost had. Maybe we needed to learn from our mistakes." Camilla stood and walked to the window again. "I think we've all learned that fear makes us choose poorly. But we have a chance now to choose based on love instead of fear, even if it's complicated and difficult." She turned back to them with a determined expression. "I'm going to call my lawyer this morning and begin divorce proceedings. I'm also going to call the museum in Boston and accept their position. Charles, you and Kate should spend whatever time you have together without the complication of a wife who never really had your heart anyway." "Camilla?" Charles started to protest, but she held up her hand. "This is what I want, Charles. Please don't make me feel guilty for choosing my own happiness for once. I've spent 20 years being the woman you needed me to be. Now I want to discover who I actually am." The finality in her voice convinced him. This wasn't a sacrifice she was making for his benefit. It was a liberation she had been planning for herself. "What happens now?" Kate asked. "Practically speaking, I mean. I have treatments scheduled, doctor's appointments." "You'll stay here," Charles said firmly. "We'll convert the guest room into whatever you need. We'll hire nurses if necessary. You won't go through this alone. And I'll stay until the house is settled and the divorce is finalized," Camilla added. "We'll all need time to adjust to this new situation." "That seems complicated," Kate observed. "Everything about this is complicated," Camilla agreed. "But for the first time in 20 years, I feel like we're being honest with each other. That has to count for something." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times. Through the French doors, the sun had finally broken through the morning clouds, casting golden light across the still wet garden. The roses that had survived the storm seemed to glow in the renewed sunshine. Charles realized that he was about to embark on the most important 6 months of his life, and possibly the most painful. He would finally have the love he had always wanted, but under circumstances that guaranteed heartbreak. Kate was dying, and no amount of love could change that. But as he looked at her sitting in the morning sunlight, her face peaceful, despite everything she was facing, he knew that he would rather have 6 months of real love with Kate than 20 more years of comfortable companionship with anyone else. "Are we really doing this?" he asked both women. "We're really doing this," Camilla confirmed. "We're finally being brave enough to choose love over safety, truth over comfort. It's 20 years late, but it's better than never." Kate reached across the space between their chairs and took Charles's hand. "6 months of honesty," she said. "6 months of being exactly who we are instead of who we think we should be." "6 months," Charles repeated, squeezing her fingers gently. Outside, the storm damage was already being repaired by nature. New growth emerging from broken branches, flowers lifting their heads toward the returning sun. Inside the morning room, 3 people began the difficult process of untangling 20 years of careful lies and replacing them with dangerous truths. The love story that had been interrupted 2 decades ago was finally ready to resume, even though everyone involved knew exactly how it would end. 5 months later, the first snow of winter was falling outside the converted guest room that had become Kate's sanctuary. The room bore little resemblance to its former incarnation as a formal space for overnight guests. Charles had installed a hospital bed by the large window so Kate could watch the changing seasons in the garden. Comfortable chairs, soft blankets, and tables covered with books and medications had transformed it into a place of both love and dying. Kate's condition had deteriorated more rapidly than anyone had expected. The cancer had spread to her liver and lungs, and the treatments had become more about managing pain than fighting the disease. But in some ways, these had been the most beautiful months of both Charles and Kate's lives. "Do you remember?" Kate said softly, her voice weaker now but still carrying traces of the sharp wit Charles had fallen in love with decades ago. "How we used to argue about whether Keats or Shelley was the superior romantic poet." Charles looked up from the letter he was writing at the small desk by her bed. They had developed a routine of correspondence even though they were in the same room, love letters that captured thoughts too intimate for spoken words. It had become their way of creating something permanent from their temporary time together. "You always insisted on Keats because of his sensuality, his focus on beauty and mortality," Charles replied, setting down his pen. "I argued for Shelley because of his idealism, his belief that love could transform the world." "I think we were both right," Kate said, turning her head toward the window where snow continued to fall. "Beauty and mortality, idealism and transformation. We've lived all of it." The months since that morning conversation in Camilla's morning room had unfolded in ways none of them had entirely anticipated. True to her word, Camilla had filed for divorce and accepted the position at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. But rather than leaving immediately, she had remained in the house, creating an unusual living arrangement that had somehow worked better than anyone had imagined. Camilla had moved into the guest suite in the West Wing, essentially creating her own apartment within the larger house. She and Charles maintained a cordial relationship, handling the practical aspects of their separation with the same efficiency they had brought to their marriage. But something unexpected had happened. Camilla and Kate had become friends. It had started with Camilla bringing Kate tea during her morning treatments. Kate's aggressive chemotherapy schedule left her nauseated and weak, and Camilla had taken it upon herself to research anti-nausea remedies and healing foods. Their conversations had begun tentatively. Two women who had spent 20 years as polite acquaintances despite sharing the same man's life. "I used to resent you," Camilla had admitted during one of these afternoon visits. "Not because you were competition. I always knew you weren't trying to steal Charles from me. I resented you because you had something I had never experienced and couldn't understand. You had the ability to love someone completely, without reservation or calculation." Kate had looked at her with surprise. "I always thought you were the strong one. You knew what you wanted and went after it. I was too afraid to even try." "But that's exactly what I mean," Camilla had explained. "I went after Charles because he represented security and status. You stayed away from him because you loved him too much to risk hurting your friendship. Your love made you selfless. Mine made me selfish." These conversations had led to a deeper understanding between the women, and gradually Camilla had become an essential part of Kate's care team. She coordinated with doctors, managed medications, and provided the kind of emotional support that Charles, overwhelmed by his own grief and love, sometimes couldn't offer. "She's in the kitchen making that ginger soup again," Charles said, settling into the chair beside Kate's bed. "The one that actually helps with your appetite." Kate smiled. Who would have thought that Camilla Morrison, society hostess extraordinaire, would turn out to be such a gifted caregiver? She's been researching holistic cancer treatments like her life depends on it. "I think in some ways it does," Charles observed. "Taking care of you has given her purpose in a way that hosting dinner parties never did. She's discovering parts of herself she never knew existed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow accumulate on the garden paths. The roses had long since been cut back for winter, but Camilla had arranged for the gardener to plant winter-blooming flowers, hellebores and winter jasmine, that provided splashes of color against the snow. "Charles," Kate said eventually, "I need to tell you something about Camilla." "What about her?" "She's found someone. In Boston. She's been driving up there on weekends, ostensibly to look at apartments and prepare for her new position. But she's also been seeing someone." Charles felt a mixture of surprise and, unexpectedly, relief. "How do you know?" "She told me. Yesterday, when you were at the pharmacy, she wanted to know if I thought you'd be upset or if it would complicate our situation." "What did you tell her?" Kate reached for his hand. "I told her that you want her to be happy, that we both do, that she deserves to find the kind of love she's never had." Charles considered this. Over the past months, he had watched his wife transform from the carefully composed woman he had married into someone more genuine and spontaneous. The strict social schedule that had once governed their lives had been abandoned in favor of a more natural rhythm dictated by Kate's health needs. Camilla had stopped wearing the formal clothes and perfect makeup that had been her armor for so many years, opting instead for comfortable sweaters and pants, her hair often pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Who is he?" Charles asked. "Dr. Michael Torres, the museum's chief curator. He's a widower with 2 teenage children. Camilla says he's kind and passionate about art in a way that reminds her why she loved art history in the first place. She lights up when she talks about him." "I'm happy for her," Charles said, and realized he meant it completely. She deserves someone who sees her as more than a perfect hostess. "There's something else," Kate continued. "She wants to talk to both of us tonight, about the future, about what happens when—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew Kate's time was running out. The doctors had adjusted their prognosis from 6 months to possibly just a few weeks. Kate's body was failing, and no amount of love or care could change that trajectory. What did she want to discuss? Practical things, but also emotional ones. What you'll do after I'm gone. Where you'll live. How to handle the grief and guilt and all the complicated feelings that will come. Charles squeezed Kate's hand gently. They had avoided these conversations for months, focusing instead on making each day beautiful and meaningful. But as Kate's condition worsened, the future was becoming an unavoidable reality. "I don't want to think about after," Charles said. "But we have to. I need to know that you'll be all right. I need to know that this time we've had together will help you live differently, love more openly, take chances you wouldn't have taken before." That evening, the 3 of them gathered in Kate's room for what they all knew would be one of their last important conversations. Camilla had prepared Kate's favorite meal, a simple pasta with herbs from the greenhouse, and they ate together by candlelight, creating the intimate atmosphere Kate preferred to the harsh overhead lighting. "I've made some decisions," Camilla announced as they finished their meal. "About the divorce, about Boston, about the house. I wanted to discuss them with both of you before I finalize anything." She had traded her usual composed demeanor for something warmer and more direct. The months of caring for Kate had stripped away many of her social pretenses, revealing someone more genuine than Charles had ever known. "Michael has asked me to move in with him and his children," Camilla continued. "Not immediately, but eventually. He says he's fallen in love with the woman I become when I'm not trying to be perfect all the time." Kate smiled. "That's wonderful, Camilla. You deserve someone who loves your imperfections as much as your strengths." "The divorce will be finalized next month," Camilla said, looking at Charles. "I want you to keep the house. It's been in your family for generations, and I think Kate would want you to have the memories you've created here together." "Camilla, the house is worth keeping for the right reasons. I'm taking my grandmother's furniture and some artwork, but I want to start fresh in Boston. I want a home that Michael and I build together, not one with 20 years of history that doesn't include him." Charles nodded, understanding. The house held memories of Kate now. Her laughter in the morning room, her quiet presence in the garden, their long conversations by the fireplace. It would be a comfort to have those memories preserved in a familiar place. "What about you, Charles?" Kate asked. "What will you do when Camilla moves to Boston?" It was a question he had been avoiding, but Kate's direct gaze demanded honesty. "I don't know. I can't imagine going back to the life I had before. The dinner parties and social obligations and careful conversations about nothing important. This time with you has shown me what it feels like to be completely authentic with another person." "You'll need to find a way to carry that forward," Kate said firmly. "You'll need to find someone else to love, someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Kate." "No, listen to me. I'm not going to live forever. I'm not going to live much longer at all. But the love we've shared these past months isn't meant to end when I die. It's meant to teach you how to love more fully, more bravely. Promise me you'll remember that." Charles felt tears burning his eyes. "I can't imagine loving anyone else." "You will," Kate said with certainty. "Not immediately, but eventually. The heart has infinite capacity for love if we let it. I want you to let it." Camilla reached across the small table and took Kate's other hand. "You've taught us both how to love more honestly. Charles is a different man than he was 5 months ago, and I'm a different woman. We both owe that to you." "You don't owe me anything," Kate protested. "You've both given me the most beautiful last months I could have imagined. I got to experience love without fear, friendship without pretense, and forgiveness I never thought I deserved." They talked until late into the night about practical matters. Kate's will, the distribution of her belongings, the small memorial service she wanted instead of a large funeral. But they also talked about intangible things, how love changes people, how honesty creates intimacy, how facing mortality makes every moment more precious. 2 weeks later, Charles woke to find Kate breathing differently. Her sleep had become more restful over the past few days, as if she were already beginning to let go of the world. He had taken to sleeping on the small sofa in her room, wanting to be near her during these final days. "Kate," he whispered, moving to her bedside. Her eyes opened slowly, and she smiled at him with the same warmth that had captivated him 25 years ago. "Good morning, my love. How are you feeling?" "Peaceful," she said simply. "Ready." Charles felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. He had known this day was coming, but the reality of losing Kate again, this time permanently, was almost unbearable. "I need you to know," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that these months with you have been worth everything. Worth 20 years of longing, worth all the pain of being sick. Worth the sadness of leaving so soon. I got to love you openly, and I got to be loved by you completely. Not everyone gets that." Charles took her hand, feeling how fragile she had become. "I love you. I will always love you." "I know, and I need you to promise me something." "Anything? Promise me you'll use what we've learned. Promise me you'll live with more courage, love with more honesty. Promise me you won't waste the rest of your life being careful." "I promise." Kate closed her eyes, still smiling. "Will you read to me? Something beautiful?" Charles reached for the volume of Keats' poems on her bedside table, opening to Bright Star, which had become her favorite. As he read the familiar words about unchanging love and eternal devotion, Kate's breathing grew slower and more peaceful. She died just as the sun was rising. Casting golden light through the window onto the winter garden they had watched change together through the seasons of their love story. Camilla found them an hour later, Charles still holding Kate's hand, still whispering words of love and gratitude. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders and held him while he cried, offering the comfort of someone who had come to love Kate too, in her own way. 6 months after Kate's death, Charles stood in the morning room where their final chapter had begun. The room looked different now. Camilla had taken her grandmother's furniture to Boston, and Charles had replaced the formal pieces with comfortable chairs and a simple wooden table. The crystal vase now held wildflowers from the garden instead of carefully arranged roses. Camilla visited regularly, bringing stories of her new life with Michael and his children. She had never been happier, she reported, discovering parts of herself she had never known existed. She was learning to cook for a family, helping teenagers with homework, and working on exhibitions that excited rather than merely impressed her. Kate would be so pleased, she had said during her last visit. She always said we were all capable of more than we were allowing ourselves to be. Charles had begun volunteering at a local hospice, reading to patients and sitting with families during difficult times. It was work that felt meaningful in a way his financial career never had. He was considering early retirement, using the life insurance settlement from Kate's policy to fund a new kind of life built on purpose rather than profit. He was also, slowly and carefully, beginning to consider the possibility of love again. A fellow hospice volunteer, a widow named Eleanor who understood both love and loss, had become a friend whose company he valued. Kate had been right. The heart did have infinite capacity for love if one was brave enough to use it. On the anniversary of Kate's death, Charles found a letter she had written to him, but hidden among her belongings. Camilla had discovered it while helping him sort through Kate's effects. "My dearest Charles," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are beginning to learn how to live without me again. But this time is different, because this time you know what real love feels like. You know what it means to be completely honest with another person, to love without holding back. I want you to carry that knowledge forward. I want you to find someone else to love with the same intensity and honesty we shared. I want you to create a life that honors what we learned together about courage and truth and the precious brevity of time. Don't mourn me for too long. Celebrate what we had. Learn from what we discovered and then love again. Love better. Love braver. Our story may be ending, but your story continues. Make it beautiful. All my love, always and forever. Kate." Charles folded the letter carefully and placed it in the desk drawer where he kept all her correspondence. Outside the window, spring was returning to the garden. New roses were beginning to bloom where winter flowers had faded, and the cycle of growth and change continued, as it always had. He thought about Kate's words, about Camilla's transformation, about his own journey from safety to courage. They had all learned that love required bravery, that honesty created intimacy, that time was too precious to waste on anything less than authentic connection. The love story that had begun in a university library 25 years ago had finally reached its conclusion. But Charles was beginning to understand that endings could also be beginnings, that love learned deeply enough could transform not just one relationship, but an entire approach to living. As evening fell over the old house, Charles sat down to write a letter to Eleanor, asking if she would like to have dinner with him next weekend. It was a small step toward the future Kate had wanted him to embrace, toward the continued story she had encouraged him to write. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Bright and eternal, like love that transcends loss and teaches the living how to live more fully. In the quiet of the house where three people had learned to choose courage over comfort, Charles began to write the next chapter of a life informed by love, loss, and the endless possibility of beginning again.